Beneath the golden skies of ancient Indochina, a storm was brewing, one that would change the course of Khmer history forever. The year was 1352, while the great temples of Angkor still stood tall in their majesty. A shadow crept from the west. The newly rising Kingdom of Ayutthaya, barely 2 decades old, cast its hungry gaze upon the weakening Khmer Empire. Led by King Uthong, Ayutthaya launched its first recorded invasion deep into Khmer territory. This wasn't just a raid, it was the opening act of a centuries-long struggle, one that would see Cambodia's borders violated time and again, its capital cities ransacked, its nobles abducted, and its people forced to kneel. This is not merely a story of conquest, it is a tale of betrayal, survival, and the enduring spirit of a wounded kingdom. Welcome to part 1 of our special series, the first Siamese invasion of Angkor. 1352 Part 1. Ayutthaya's first attack on Angkor. By the mid-14th century, the mighty Khmer Empire, once the marvel of Southeast Asia, was beginning to show signs of fatigue. The empire that had raised Angkor Wat and ruled the Mekong Basin was now struggling to maintain control over its vast territories. Internal divisions, succession disputes, and ecological decline began to fray the fabric of imperial strength. And far to the west, in the lower Chao Phraya River basin, a new power was rising. Founded in 1350 by King Ithon, also known as Ramathibodi the Kingdom of Ayutthaya emerged from the crucible of trade, warfare, and ambition. From its earliest days, Ayutthaya's rulers sought to assert their dominance, not just through diplomacy, but by military conquest, and their first major target was the Khmer Empire. By 1352, just 2 years after its founding, Ayutthaya had already declared war on the Khmers, sending an army directly into the empire's heartland. This was not a border skirmish, it was a calculated invasion of one of the oldest and most prestigious civilizations in the region. Historical records are sparse, but what we know is chilling. The annals of Ayutthaya and the later royal chronicles of Thailand record this campaign with pride, whereas Khmer sources, much of them lost or destroyed, reveal little beyond the aftermath, ruins, grief, and the slow collapse of Angkor's authority. According to the Luang Prasat Chronicle, King Uthong dispatched a massive force toward the Khmer capital. Their goal, not merely plunder, but submission. The invasion of 1352 would mark the first time Ayutthaya laid siege to Angkor Thom. At the time, the Khmer throne was occupied by King Suryavamsa Rayaduraj, a monarch struggling to maintain unity amid growing regional rivalries. Facing rebellions in the provinces, logistical issues in the countryside, and weakened influence over peripheral vassals, he was in no position to resist a full-scale invasion. And yet, as Ayutthaya soldiers approached Angkor, Khmer forces rallied, desperately defending their sacred city from the foreign invaders. The battle for Angkor was fierce and bloody. Thai sources proudly assert that Ayutthaya's troops broke through Khmer defenses and occupied the city for a brief period, even if only temporarily. The reality may have been more complicated. Khmer defenders put up stubborn resistance. Angkor, built as a fortress with moats and stone walls, did not fall easily. Some historians suggest that while Ayutthaya managed to breach the outskirts of Angkor, they were pushed back after looting certain temples and outposts. Others argue the city may have been sacked partially, with Khmer royals fleeing and later reclaiming it. Either way, the cost was high. Temples were desecrated, statues of the Buddha and Hindu deities were defaced or looted, sacred relics were taken westward, and perhaps, worst of all, the symbolic prestige of the Khmer capital had been pierced. This was not merely a military defeat, it was a psychological wound. The Khmer Empire had survived Mongol threats, Champa raids, and internal rebellion, but never before had a Western neighbor marched directly into Angkor with such open aggression. More than just a physical blow, the 1352 invasion marked a turning point in the balance of power. It sent a message to the region: Ayutthaya was rising, and the Khmer Empire was vulnerable. Cambodian society, reeling from this humiliation, saw the beginning of a deeper existential crisis. From this point onward, Siamese interference would become a recurring nightmare, one that would haunt Cambodia for centuries. The invasion also set a precedent. It showed Ayutthaya that Angkor could be reached, that Khmer lands were rich and poorly defended, that with the right alliances and timing, Siam could displace its eastern rival. In time, Ayutthaya would repeat this tactic again and again, raiding Khmer territory, installing puppet rulers, and even abducting Cambodian royals to Siam. For Cambodia, the invasion was a wake-up call, but the empire, weakened by years of internal instability and disconnected rule, could not fully respond. The grand irrigation systems of Angkor were beginning to fail. Rice yields were declining. Noble factions vied for power, while distant provinces declared autonomy. Some scholars even suggest that the growing influence of Theravada Buddhism imported from the West began to displace the traditional Hindu Brahmin elite, creating ideological fractures within the kingdom. In the face of these pressures, the attack from Ayutthaya proved more than a military disaster. It was a spiritual and cultural insult. Khmer identity, once synonymous with grandeur and sacred kingship, was now under siege. Even if Ayutthaya's army withdrew or was repelled shortly after the 1352 campaign, the damage had been done. Cambodia would never be the same again. It is important to understand that this first invasion was not an isolated act of conquest. It was the beginning of a pattern, a historical cycle of Siamese incursions into Khmer territory, justified by later rulers under the guise of cultural superiority or dynastic claims. But at its root, the War of 1352 was a land grab, fueled by greed, ambition, and the lust for power. It was about seizing Angkor's wealth, its people, its prestige, and it was about sending a clear message to the world. Siam had arrived, and it would stop at nothing to expand. As Khmer villages buried their dead and temple bells fell silent, the trauma of this attack spread far and wide. In the provinces, farmers told tales of Siamese soldiers burning granaries. In the capital, monks wept for lost scrolls and shattered altars. Children grew up fearing the West, knowing that across the hills lay a kingdom that would return again and again, each time more brutal than the last. But even in tragedy, there was resistance. Khmer artisans continued to carve sacred stone. Soldiers trained in jungle camps, preparing for the next invasion. The spirit of Angkor did not die in 1352, which was wounded, but alive. And though Siam would come back, Cambodia would endure, even if that endurance came at the cost of blood, sorrow, and centuries of struggle. In the next episode, we will explore how Ayutthaya's ambitions only grew more relentless, and how the Khmer Empire, reeling from its first invasion, would face greater losses in the years to come. But for now, let us pause and reflect. 1352 was not merely a battle year. It was the moment when one empire began to fall and another began to rise. Part 2. Flames across the plain. Ayutthaya's bloody advance. The year is 1352. Khmer sentinels along the borderlands of the Dangrik Mountains light fire beacons, their torches illuminating the rising panic within. From across the plain, war drums echo from Ayutthaya. King Uthong, also known as Ramathai Bordi I, has sent his armies once again, this time not as a raid, but as a campaign. This was more than pillaging. This was ambition. This was conquest. The Khmer Empire, already wounded from internal strife, faces a rising predator to its west, young, energetic, and ruthless. Ayutthaya's forces march in with determination, believing that the old Khmer realm, once the jewel of Indochina, is ripe for taking. Villagers flee as Ayutthayan troops sweep through border settlements. Buddhist temples are spared, not from compassion, but from calculation. Ayutthaya seeks spiritual legitimacy, and desecrating the shared faith would tarnish its image. However, Khmer state shrines and ancestral halls are ransacked, as if to sever the memory of a proud empire. The Khmer resistance is fierce but fractured. Civil conflicts had splintered royal authority. In the court of Angkor Thom, rival factions bicker over succession. While generals like Senche prepare counter-offensives, corrupt ministers delay logistics. The once formidable Khmer army, famed for its war elephants and canal engineering brilliance, is forced into desperate defense. Ayutthaya exploits this chaos with surgical precision. Their generals, younger and bolder, bypass fortified towns and strike the arteries of Khmer administration: roads, water networks, food, granaries. Ayutthayan scouts poison wells and burn rice paddies, knowing famine will do what steel cannot. Khmer farmers, caught between two armies, abandon fields. Some are forced into conscription. Others are accused of Ayutthayan sympathy and executed by paranoid Khmer commanders. The once thriving countryside around Battambang and Siem Reap becomes a ghost land of smoldering huts, abandoned irrigation dikes, and bones bleached in the sun. One brutal winter, Ayutthayan forces reach the outer walls of Angkor itself. They do not attempt a full assault yet. Instead, they launch psychological warfare. Nightly, they play war horns to deprive the defenders of sleep. They capture Khmer scouts and mutilate them before releasing them back. Messages are sent to nearby provinces: defect, and you'll be spared. Resist, and your women and children will be fed to dogs. Several provincial governors, tired of Phnom Penh's instability, switch sides. These betrayals devastate morale inside Angkor. Among the defenders, whispers grow. Perhaps Ayutthaya is destined to inherit the mantle of Suvarnabhumi. Khmer monks plead for peace, warning the king that karma now turns against them for forsaking Dharma. But in the royal chambers, surrounded by concubines and intoxicated ministers, the emperor dithers. Reports of Ayutthaya's discipline and unity only deepen his paralysis. Meanwhile, King Ithong issues proclamations declaring Ayutthaya the rightful heir to Khmer civilization. He paints himself not as a destroyer, but a restorer, claiming the mandate of heaven has passed to him. This political rhetoric spreads quickly through Buddhist temples, where many monks, tired of war and corruption, begin reciting prayers for the coming new order. Skirmishes erupt near the Sap Lake. Khmer river forces attempt to block Ayutthaya's supply lines. A fierce naval clash at Kampong Svay leaves hundreds dead. Smoke chokes the waterways, and bloated corpses drift along with severed boat fragments. Ayutthaya's admiral orders the river to be dammed and redirected, an act not of engineering but of destruction. This disrupts Khmer canal systems vital for rice cultivation, plunging entire districts into starvation. Ayutthaya's policy is clear: win not just through swords, but by breaking the land itself. In a bold maneuver, Ayutthayan cavalry breaks through a western pass and seizes the hill temples of Phnom Bakeng. From these heights, they shell Angkor with catapults and fire. The sacred mountain, once a symbol of Khmer divine kingship, is now a forward operating base. Khmer defenders attempt to retake it, but their coordination fails. Arrows rain down on them like judgment from above. Night after night, the flames of ruined villages glow across the horizon like burning scrolls of history. Meanwhile, Ayutthaya begins taking hostages noble children, village elders, even monks. They are marched in chains back to Lopburi and Ayutthaya itself, to be displayed like trophies or indoctrinated into the new court. Khmer identity, piece by piece, is torn from its roots and replanted under Siamese banners. Some are forced to learn new dialects. Others are married off into Ayutthayan nobility to seal alliances through blood and humiliation. In Lopburi, Khmer artisans are compelled to carve Ayutthayan royal iconography, symbolizing not just conquest, but replacement. By this point, famine grips the region. Starving Khmer villagers boil tree bark and eat clay mixed with fish paste. Desperation leads to rebellion. Khmer brigands ambush Ayutthayan caravans, only to be slaughtered in retaliation. Yet in spite of the brutality, resistance persists. In the forests of Kompong Tom, a Khmer warlord named Khmer unites refugees and rogue soldiers into a guerrilla force. For months, they sabotage Ayutthayan outposts, poison food caches, and kill collaborators. But Ayutthaya adapts. They begin burning entire forests, suffocating Khmer's hideouts with smoke and flame. One night, his camp is encircled and massacred. Only children survive, later branded and sold as domestic servants. Ayutthaya's victory now seems inevitable, but with every gain, their reputation also darkens. Foreign emissaries from Champa and Lanshang whisper of Ayutthaya's cruelty. Trade caravans avoid Siamese territory. Even within Ayutthaya's court, voices of concern rise. General Boromaracha urges King Uthong to halt further expansion, warning that overstretch could invite collapse. But the king, emboldened by each victory, envisions himself as Chakravartina universal ruler. To him, Khmer submission is not just strategy, it is prophecy. In one final campaign before the monsoon season, Ayutthaya captures the temple city of Banti Shrai. Though small in scale, its symbolic value is immense. Khmer scribes had long considered it a sacred feminine sanctuary. Ayutthayan soldiers desecrate the reliefs, carving their own names into the pink sandstone. Some loot the statues and melt them into ingots. A few monks are taken back to Ayutthaya, where they are paraded through the city's gates and forced to bow before Ayutthayan relics. At home, the spectacle is praised. In Khmer lands, it is remembered as the beginning of silence. By late 1353, the once glorious Khmer Empire lies fractured. Though Angkor still stands, it is increasingly surrounded, not by walls of stone, but by Ayutthayan influence. Puppet governors are installed in outlying provinces. Khmer traders must pay tribute to Ayutthaya. Buddhist texts are now copied with Ayutthayan royal endorsements. The idea of a separate Khmer destiny begins to blur. Cultural erosion becomes the quietest, yet most effective, conquest. Yet, even as Ayutthaya celebrates, the seeds of resistance remain. In the temples of Angkor, Wat, scribes continue to etch records of Ayutthayan brutality, preserving memory even in defeat. Khmer children are told bedtime tales not of glory, but of survival. A people who once ruled the rivers and forests now learn to endure within them. They do not forget, they do not forgive, and though the empire may fall, its spirit remains carved into stone, carried in song, and whispered across generations. Part 3. Ashes of Empire. The fall of Angkor and the rise of Ayutthaya in the dying embers of the 14th century. The Khmer Empire, once the beacon of Southeast Asia, stood battered and bleeding. After surviving centuries of war, plague, and rebellion, it faced its most devastating blow, the sack of Angkor. What Ayutthaya began in 1352 with King Uthong's probing invasion would culminate nearly 80 years later in 1431, when Siamese forces finally broke through the heart of the Khmer realm. But this story isn't only about conquest, it is about what was lost, what was taken, and what never recovered. In the ashes of temples and the silence of looted halls, Cambodia's golden age ended and Ayutthaya's ascendancy began. As the 15th century progressed, Khmer rulers struggled to maintain the illusion of imperial strength. Their armies, once massive and revered, were now smaller, less disciplined, and increasingly dependent on foreign mercenaries. Internal divisions plagued the court. Succession disputes and regional rebellions splintered Khmer authority, making it vulnerable to external aggression. Meanwhile, Ayutthaya was rising like a storm from the south, consolidating power and expanding its reach. By 1400, Ayutthaya's military had become a formidable machine bolstered by tributary states, war elephants, and a growing merchant class funding the crown's ambitions. The decisive moment came in the 1430s, when King Boromaracha II of Ayutthaya turned his gaze fully toward Angkor. Unlike previous raids, this was a deliberate campaign of annihilation. By 1430, Ayutthaya launched a full-scale invasion of the Khmer heartland, crossing the Mekong and smashing through the scattered border outposts. Khmer defenses crumbled. Their traditional fortress cities were outdated and undermanned. The once feared warriors of Angkor were now outmatched in both arms and organization. In 1431, the invaders reached Angkor Thom itself. What followed was not a battle but a systematic occupation. The Siamese likely blockaded the city, starving it from within. Khmer elites fled. Temples were looted. Records and artifacts were burned or taken. Some historians believe the famed bronzes of Angkor statues of gods and kings were melted down and recast in Ayutthaya, their sanctity erased and rebranded under a new power. Thousands of Khmer artisans, dancers, scribes, and nobles were forcibly relocated to Ayutthaya. These were not mere prisoners. They were cultural trophies, living symbols of a conquered civilization. This mass deportation had devastating consequences. The Khmer royal court lost its scribes and record keepers, leading to a near collapse of bureaucratic function. Without artisans and builders, temple maintenance ceased. Angkor Wat, once a symbol of divine kingship and celestial order, began its long decay into jungle obscurity. Cambodia's intellectual and spiritual lifeblood was extracted and absorbed into Siamese society. Ayutthaya, enriched by Khmer talent, began to adopt and rebrand aspects of Khmer culture as its own architecture, court rituals, even language. The Khmer king Ponhayayot fled south, establishing a new capital at Phnom Penh. This marked not just a geographic shift, but a psychological retreat. The center of Cambodian identity was no longer Angkor, it was now a city built in exile. The symbolic heart of the empire was gone. The idea of divine kingship was shattered. From this point onward, Cambodia would be a fractured kingdom, caught between stronger neighbors and haunted by memories of past grandeur. But Ayutthaya's triumph didn't end with military victory. The Siamese sought to rewrite the narrative. Ayutthaya's chronicles portrayed the Khmer kings as decadent and arrogant figures who had lost the mandate of heaven. These stories painted the invasion as righteous, divinely sanctioned conquest. Such narratives served not only to justify past aggression, but also to legitimize future domination. From this point on, Siamese rulers would treat Cambodia as a subordinate, a vassal to be molded, threatened, or invaded whenever convenient. The centuries that followed were a dark age for Cambodia. Ayutthaya continued to meddle in Cambodian succession, supporting puppet kings, kidnapping royal heirs, and demanding tribute. Khmer sovereignty became a conditional privilege rather than a birthright. Even when Cambodia briefly reasserted its independence, it did so under the looming shadow of Siamese reprisal. Meanwhile, Ayutthaya blossomed, funded by stolen labor and knowledge. Khmer engineers helped build Ayutthaya's walled city. Khmer dancers performed in the royal court. Khmer scripts influenced the Thai language. The same civilization that had once illuminated the region was now fueling the machine that had crushed it. This wasn't just a war of soldiers and kings. It was a war of memory. As Ayutthaya rose, it worked to erase or appropriate Khmer contributions. In many Thai accounts, Angkor's glory became a footnote, a fading relic rather than a foundational legacy. Yet the truth lingers in the stones. Thai temples echo the layout of Angkor Wat. Thai ceremonies mirror ancient Khmer rituals. The roots are visible for those who dare to look. For modern Cambodians, the fall of Angkor remains a wound that has never fully healed. It marks the transition from dominance to survival, from empire to nation. Yet in this pain, there is also resilience. Cambodia did not vanish. It endured. Phnom Penh would grow. Khmer identity would survive centuries of trauma, colonization, war, genocide, and still find voice in the modern age. But the scars of 1431 run deep. The sack of Angkor was not just an ending, it was the beginning of a cycle of aggression and submission between Cambodia and Siam, now Thailand, that continues into the present. The same geopolitical forces that crushed Angkor would reappear in future centuries. In the wars of the 16th century, the colonial manipulations of the 19th, and even the border disputes of today. To understand the fall of Angkor is to understand the roots of Cambodia's geopolitical trauma. In the final analysis, the fall of Angkor was not inevitable. It was orchestrated by ambition, by invasion, by calculated cultural theft. Ayutthaya's rise came at the expense of Cambodia's soul, and though the temples remain, weathered and broken beneath the jungle canopy, their silence speaks of a once great civilization brought low, not by fate, but by force. This is not a tale of equal kingdoms locked in mutual rivalry. It is the story of an aggressor seizing its neighbor's glory, and a victim nation struggling to preserve its dignity. It is the story of how Cambodia's golden age ended and how, through all that followed, its people still carried the embers of Angkor in their hearts. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.